possibly can. I did want to mention at the beginning, all of this spiritual warfare stuff is wrapped into a little class book that I've had out for many years now. And I had 20 copies of it, but I don't have 20 copies of it anymore. And it's called A War to Be Won, A War to Be Won. It's available on Amazon, Kindle, all of that. So if you just type in A War to Be Won, Kerry Williams, if you have an interest in this, or if you want to use it for a Bible class or small group or something like that, it's got 13 chapters and then questions at the end of every chapter. And then I do have a few of these left. This is Angel at War. If you've read the Screw Tape Letters, I've consumed all of this spiritual warfare stuff for all these years, and I really was intrigued. I think the greatest thing ever written was the Screw Tape Letters that talked about C.S. Lewis and his brilliance, discussed wormwood and screw tape, and it's kind of a fictional account of a tempter who's getting advice from his uncle. I don't know if evil angelic beings have uncles or not, but still, it was very well done, and I loved it. So I thought, wouldn't it be neat if there was a fictional account that was consistent with what we read about throughout Scripture about spiritual warfare, that was written from the opposite perspective, that tracked an angel as he protected a Christian. So that's what Angel at War is. It's been out about 8 months now, and I think I have 3 or 4 copies, but that one's also available on Kindle and Amazon, and even as an audio book on Audible. So that's called Angel at War. Also, I do spiritual warfare seminars in congregations, so if you think this would be something that your congregation might benefit from, I'd love to visit with you about that. But we talked about Satan's tactics yesterday, and as we worked through, I told you that we could come up with many, many more. And in fact, I talked about how Tommy probably has, Tommy was one of those students that as I was grading him, I didn't really put any marks on his paper because I was taking notes for things I wanted to preach from his papers. Richard Rogers used to say when we were at Sunset, steal from the best, steal from the best. So I've stolen a few things from Tommy through the years. He wrote some tremendous papers, but he came up, he told me, with several more. So I'm sure there are many more tactics the devil is presently using. But I in my ministry, in my own personal life, as the devil attacks me through his minions every day, and I say the devil attacks me through his minions, because the devil, I believe, is an angel, a fallen angel, perhaps even the archangel. We didn't get in this time to talk about the origins of Satan and the nature of Satan. But the devil, if he is indeed a fallen angel, then he is limited like all angels are. Even if he's the head honcho angel, still would be a demonic angel. And that means that he has limitations. He is not the dark side of the force. He is not like God, okay? He's powerful, yes, but not in comparison to God. So the attributes of the divine he does not have. He is not omniscient. He is not all-powerful. He is not all-knowing, and he's not in every place at one time. He's not omnipresent. And so that means that, since he doesn't know everything, and he doesn't because he put Jesus on the cross. He doesn't know everything. And he doesn't know everything. And he can't be in every place at one time. That's why he has princes, principalities, and powers of wickedness in the heavenly. He has a command structure, right? So I don't know. You may have been assigned a captain or a lieutenant in the army of heaven. I think mine's a level 3 private. I don't know, but I've been assigned somebody, you've been assigned somebody, and we're being tempted by them that report, I would guess, to maybe the Prince of Persia or the Prince of Washington or whatever it may be. And what's also a part of that is that I wonder, and I don't know, we just don't think this way sometimes, but I wonder if the devil knows my name. See, I don't think he does. To my great shame. Because the devil, there are 7 billion people on this planet. Right? And I don't know all the names of everybody I see all the time. How about you? And he doesn't know everything. He's not all-knowing. Why does he need princes, principalities, and powers of wickedness? Why does he need princes and captains and lieutenants and all of this? Because he can only be in one place at one time. He can't do everything himself. But, sometimes I pray to God, Lord, help me be effective enough that the devil knows my name. Wouldn't that be an objective for every believer, to be enough of a threat to the enemy? So I'm tempted. I figured by one of his lowly minions, but you're tempted. He works on all of us, and he uses these tactics each and every day. Despair, guilt, fear, anxiety, and dissension. We covered despair. We covered guilt fairly extensively. So today we're starting in on fear. I told you that I struggled with anxiety for many, many years. And all anxiety is fear. And it helped me so much. And we talked about this in our first point when we were discussing anxiety and we were discussing discouragement, depression, and all of that, that it's all about how we feel. Well, that wraps right over into this concept of fear and anxiety. Folks, just because you're afraid of something doesn't mean it's a valid thing to be afraid of. Many of the things we're afraid of, I will never, ever be able to forget that right before I got up to preach, a sweet brother told me that they found a new type of shark in Puget Sound. So now I can't even focus on my lesson because there's a new kind of shark in Puget Sound. And so remember, I insinuated yesterday that the one place I might swim was in the ocean out here. Just forget that was ever said. But, I know that is an irrational fear. But it's all right if I'm afraid. If my wife won't ride elevators, I got to lug all the luggage up 7 flights of stairs. In the ultimate, that doesn't matter. But in things that hinder our faith, we have to first ask the question and remove it from how we feel about it. Because, as we said, the heart is deceitful above all things. Who knows what lies it will tell? Folks, just because you feel it doesn't make it true. Just because you feel it doesn't make it true. Just because you feel it doesn't make it true. How much should our world learn that and repeat that mantra over and over and over? Because I can tell you, I have felt some powerful things that didn't make any sense at all. I might even have trouble going into lakes and rivers because I saw a graphic one time had color codes on different states of how many shark attacks they'd had through the years. And California was like dark colored. I mean, it had a bunch. And Florida was like black. It was really dark. And then the lighter colors, and then they were grayed out. The ones that, so like Iowa didn't have any shark attacks, right? Illinois didn't. But the most disconcerting part of it all, Kentucky had one. Kentucky. I Googled and tried to figure that one out, but all I could figure is Mississippi River, some shark got really lost. But the thing is that if we allow fears to overcome, I wouldn't even get in a river, right? Because there's been one shark attack somehow in Kentucky. And the thing is that, you see, emotions aren't rational. Sometimes they're beautiful. Can you tell I'm a little bit of an emotional person? I'm not down on emotion. I think it's beautiful. I wouldn't want to live my life without them. But I'm telling you, when they are your master, then your life is going to go down the wrong road every single time. Emotions are fine when you've got the shackles on them, when your mind is in control of those emotions. But when you allow them to control you, they will take you down roads in your life and bring you misery after misery. And when it comes to that, Satan wants us to live our lives in fear, in a constant state of fear. Right now, it's because, brethren are looking at society and it's so on, and brethren are afraid. They're afraid about what's going to happen in the next election and what's going to happen with society and what's going to happen in our public schools and what's going to happen. And I'm not saying those things don't have some, basis of reality. They do. But here's the thing. I mean, we're the kingdom that will never be destroyed. I mean, it's not going to be, the church is going to be here. Does everybody know that? I mean, intellectually know that. And we don't lose unless we give up. I mean, that's been interlaced through everything we've said these last 3 days. We cannot lose if we don't give up. And whether or not you give up is completely within your power. Completely. No matter what is done to you. So here's the thing. Why would any fear cripple us? When we know that intellectually. I've seen Christians, and Miss Lenore and I've been there too. We got 3 children that we love. And it's much easier to raise little kids than it is to be we talked about that the other day, than to be the parent of a grown child. You can't control them. And we worry about them. And you worry about your kids. About the choices they're going to make. About how they're going to raise your grandkids. About so many different things. And, you know, we could, if we allowed it, we could allow ourselves to spiral down rather than knowing what we know in our mind and in our rational thought from the promises of God. Which is that in our family, we have a family motto. And I got it, and I'll talk about it probably a little bit tonight, but I got it from the story of Abraham, because I love the story of Abraham with all my heart, especially the weird parts of the story, and we'll mention some of those later. But all of my children's lives, they've heard as they were tucked into bed, if you be all about God, God will be all about you. And that's what we believe, to the core of our being. But you see, fear threatens that truth. And the ability to overcome the fear is that truth and embracing it. Yes, it may be scary. Yes, we don't know the future. Yes, things seem to be spiraling out of control. But if I be all about God, God will be all about me. He's always been that way, consistently, in the life of every great hero of faith. So am I going to go by how I feel? I mean, am I going to trust that thing that can change if I get a good cup of coffee? Or an ice cream cone? Or this awesome, awesome Chinese buffet in Tacoma, Washington? I mean, I was pretty happy for a few minutes. Dopamine, man. They served shrimp and sushi and noodles and dopamine at that place today. It was awesome. I was happy. But you know, something else can happen and I won't be happy anymore if that's what it's based on, right? Am I going to let that dictate my life? But that's what people do. All around you. Everywhere. Every day. Fear. So how do we overcome fear? Well, a powerful tool to overcome fear is focusing, and this sounds counterintuitive, but it's true in Scripture, focusing on a greater fear. Think about it. All of us, many of us raise kids, and there are different levels of fears, right? I mean, my kids were afraid of some things and not others, and I remember my son was really crazy about making sure his coaches thought well of him, right? And he was really crazy about making sure the other boys on the ball teams respected him. And there was one instance where he had gotten in some trouble, and I found out about it. And I went and picked him up from school and took him out and gave him the lecture and told him the punishment and all of that. And football practice had already started about 45 minutes after we were done with the come to Jesus meeting we were having. And I said, okay, get in the car. I'm taking you back to football practice. And he said, Dad, I'll just skip. I'll just tell him I was sick. I said, well, you ain't sick, so you ain't telling him you're sick. I said, and you're going. He said, Dad, it won't matter. I just won't go. And I said, oh, no, you're going. You're going to march in there in front of everybody. But then he was terrified because he didn't want all the boys saying, well, what happened? What happened? And the coach, he said, he's going to make me run 3 miles. I said, oh, I'm counting on it. And then he started to get belligerent with me. And then I got upset. And suddenly, I mean, he's terrified of going back and facing his friends and facing his coach. And suddenly he said, yeah, I'm getting my stuff, Dad. Let's go to the car. Because when Dad gets that fire in his eyes, I mean, anybody's daddy, his daddy gets his fire in his eyes at the right level, you know. And here this big strapping high school football player, when Dad gets that tone and gets that look, suddenly he's not afraid of those boys anymore. Suddenly he's not afraid of the coach anymore. Yeah, Dad, let's go. What is that called? Did that make him not afraid? Was he excited about the looks and all the questions the boys would give him and running 3 miles in Arkansas heat in the summer? Is that what he was? No. But the greater fear just washed away those lesser fears. Everybody understand that? Look at Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4, and we see a very similar and interesting story. Because here in Mark chapter 4, Jesus is exhausted. And I absolutely love this section of Scripture. Just these several chapters in Mark. Because, I mean, it's one after the other. And it's so intriguing because you have here Jesus, and we know that He's going to calm the storm. And then suddenly they're going to land at the land of the Gerasenes. And you remember what happens there. And what a story, because after these terrible, terrifying events of this night, in the early twilight morning, they land when it's still dark outside, and they land in a graveyard, and they hear the woo! And they look out among the tombstones, and here's a guy running at them in the darkness with chains in his hands and feet, wailing with scars and cuts and blood oozing all over his body. And the Bible doesn't tell us where the disciples were, but I know they were back in the boat. That's where they were. Right? And then we go straight from the demon-possessed man. And then we have the woman with, the issue of blood. And Jesus, who is it that touched me? Well, Lord, everybody touched you. Yeah, but I want to know the one whom power went out from me. And then, of course, we have the raising of Jairus' daughter. And all these stories just go, what a tremendous section of Scripture. But it kind of starts with this story where Jesus has been teaching. And it says in verse 35, on the same day when the evening had come, He said to them, let us cross over to the other side. Now when they had left the multitude, they took Him along in the boat as He was, and the other little boats also with Him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat that was already filling. But He was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke Him and said to Him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Okay, Levi, I don't know where he is, but I can tell you, I love most of the songs in our book. But there's a few of them that just, like, the tone just doesn't get me. Like, He bore it all. The words of that song are beautiful. But the tone is do-do-do-do-do-do. Think about the words with that tone. It's like, doesn't fit, right? Don't love it. These are the days of Elijah. I don't understand it. I don't understand what they're saying. I love the tune, but I don't understand it. But the one that gets me because of this passage, Master, the tempest is raging, the billows, because of the tone. It makes it sound like that they said, Master, the tempest is raging. That is not what they did. What'd they do? They grabbed Him, they shook Him, and they screamed at Him. We're going to die. We're going to die. And they didn't want Him to do what He did. They had no idea that that would happen. You know what they wanted? One more person to bail water. That's what they wanted. So, Master, the tempest is raging. And Jesus, He's asleep. Now think about this. Now this is His human part. Jesus is asleep in the boat during a storm that is terrifying men who make their living on the sea. This is a serious storm. This is worse than anything you've been in on a cruise ship. I promise you that. It is bad. And they're so terrified they shake him awake. And what I love about the story is this. Now, it's translated in our versions, and I think this is what Jesus said, of course. But Jesus said, peace be still. But how I interpret that, because I've said much the same thing. I'm a preacher, so it's obligatory that I take an afternoon nap on Sundays. It's in my contract. And so I take my afternoon nap, and I've done that for years. And my kids, because if you don't know this, you need to love your preacher, because preaching is the equivalent of working a labor job for 8 hours. I read that somewhere, and I'm sticking to it. But it is kind of exhausting, right, guys? I mean, it's exhausting. So I take a nap, and sometimes my kids would come in, and rather than like, excuse me, Dad, like it's depicted in the song, carest thou not if we... But my kids didn't do it that way. Sometimes they'd come in and like, Dad, Dad, Dad. Anybody ever have that? And you know what I said every time when I'm groggy and tired and they just jolt you awake from a deep sleep? I said the same thing as Jesus. Different words, same thing. Same thing. Peace be still. Close your mouth. Leave my room. Get out of here or you're going to die. Because I'm groggy, I'm tired, and I just got woken up. He is so tired. Do you know you can? It seems impossible that a person could sleep through that. I did mission work several times in places, and I was in Ethiopia one time, and I'd had great sickness for days. I won't go into detail, but it was awful. And we had to go 6 hours from one place to another on roads that have potholes that big and that deep. And in Africa, you guys have been, they drive whatever speed they can over it. And so I'm boom, boom, boom for 6 hours. And I don't even remember the drive. I was sleeping the whole time. My head had bruises on it when I woke up, hitting the door. But I was that tired. You can be that tired. That's how tired Jesus is. They shake him awake. And he does exactly what I used to do, exactly what you've done when you broke up. He just wakes up and says, be quiet! And the universe listened. Jesus just wakes up and says, be quiet! And Mother Nature said, yes, sir. The storm just stopped. And the disciples do the same thing that my kids did when I woke up in that way. Okay. I mean, that's what they did, right? Because the interesting thing about what it says here is it says, he rebuked the wind and the waves and the sea, peace be still. And the wind ceased and there was a great calm. But he said to them, and I don't think his tone was probably extremely instructive in this, right? He's still frustrated. Why are you so fearful? How is it you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? You see, the disciples in that moment weren't worried about the storm coming again. They had a bigger fear to deal with. The greater fear cast out the fear. And I think the lesson that needs to be learned from this is that that is how you overcome fears. You know, some of the fears, if you have some silly fears, I remember when I was a kid, I had some fears of things, and I look at my life now and I just don't even think about those things. I do those things. I fulfill my responsibilities. You know why? Because this day came in my life when I had a lady to feed and a bunch of kids to feed, and suddenly I didn't have time for some of them fears. Right? Anybody there? Because sometimes the responsibilities overcame the fear. My point is that we overcome some of these things that are difficult. They feel so powerful, but we know intellectually that they shouldn't control us, and we overcome them by ordering the priorities of our heart Because when we think about the idea of fear, you look at Hebrews chapter 13, 5 and 6, where it says, give up covetousness and all of that. Because he says, I will never leave you or forsake you. Therefore, I will boldly say, what can man do unto me? You see, that doesn't mean we don't. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were afraid. It wasn't that. My son likes, when he was young, we used to like to read comic books and watch all those shows, and Marvel was big in those days. And I remember my wife thinks these are the stupidest conversations. The who would win Batman versus Superman conversations, Or I remember one time we had this conversation about, Superman's not afraid of anything. He's really brave. And I said to my son, I just had this moment of inspiration. I said, son, Superman's not brave. He's invincible. There's no courage in invincibility. The only people that are courageous are the people who are trembling inside and do it anyway. Who press forward. Who, when they're being arrested to go to the fiery furnace, are afraid to the core of their being, but they determine, like Job, Lord, even if you slay me, still I will serve you. Choose ye this day whom you shall serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But be ye faithful unto, and that does not mean till you grow old and die. Be you faithful unto, even if it means your life. And you'll receive the crown of righteousness. Courage is not a lack of fear. Courage is greater priorities that cause us to be more afraid not to do what we must do than to give in to that petty fear. We think about Matthew chapter 14, and we don't have to turn, we always run out of time, so we just won't turn over there. We'll just kind of reference it. But that's the other time they're on the sea, remember? And Jesus walks to them on the water. And they look out and they think it's a ghost, and he says it is I. And they say, well, Peter, if it's you, ask me to come to you. And Peter steps out. Peter gets a really bad rap. Because Peter is the one who sank. And Peter is the one who, he'd say, get behind me, Satan. And Peter is the one who often said the wrong thing at the wrong time. Peter is the one that said, no, Lord, you won't be killed because I won't allow it to happen. Peter is the one that denied the Lord 3 times. But you know what people forget? Peter's the one who was willing to speak when everybody else was afraid to speak. And Peter's the one who had the courage to get out of the boat. And Peter's the one who was following at a distance when all the other disciples had ran away. Oh yeah, he failed pretty big. But people will never fail who never try. And Peter failed big because he tried big. And later on, when he started firing on all cylinders and started to know, what did he do? Therefore, let all the house of Israel know for certain that God has made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you crucified. And they were pierced to the heart and said to Peter and the rest of the apostles, men and brethren, what shall we do? He's the one that said that without fear. But here, he calls out to Jesus. He's the only one brave enough to get out of the boat. And he walks on the water a little while. But then the text says that he began to see the wind and the waves around him. You see, what that teaches us is that we can handle anything, the wilderness that life throws at us, as long as it's in our peripheral vision. And as Jesus is our focus. Because as long as he had Jesus in his focus. Now, he knew the wind and the waves were there. That water was slapping against his face and the wind was blowing his hair. But it wasn't a problem as long as Jesus was right there in his vision. But as soon as he put Jesus in the peripheral and put the wind and the waves in his focus, then he began to sink. You see, I have no doubt Peter was afraid. He was walking on the water, and there might have been sharks underneath him. He was walking on the water. You know he had to be afraid. You know how he overcame that fear? He just kept his eyes on Jesus. And the moment he didn't is the moment he failed. How do we overcome fear? There's a greater fear. And just like my son, when he was looking, and suddenly all that fear of the coach and those boys drifted away because he realized in that moment, hey, there's a bigger thing going on here. If I make Dad too upset, it's a bigger deal. And I can tell you this, when your focus is on pleasing God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your greatest fear is that you'll disappoint him, break his heart, you will overcome the other stuff. And you will do what's right. When you do as Ecclesiastes says, the wisest man who ever lived, who made the most unwise life choices of anybody who ever lived. In the book of Ecclesiastes, as he goes through everything, it says meaningless, 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 meaningless. Money, titles, women, relationships, fame, meaningless. Vanity of vanities. But then he comes up with the right answer. What is the conclusion of the whole matter? Fear God and keep his commandments. If that's your greatest fear, it has the ability to wash away all the others that hold you back. But Satan wants to use it. Apathy. Ooh. Ease is dangerous. Idle hands. Anybody's mama ever talk about that? I'm telling you. Not having things to occupy your time, not exercising, and this is true whether it's physical. I mean, isn't it amazing that a person can be sick and be in a hospital bed for like 2 weeks and then they have to go through rehab? I mean, like learn how to walk. I mean, it's been 2 weeks. But yet, that happens all the time. Why is that? Apathy. Because if you stop using your legs, you won't be able to use your legs. It's just a true principle of life in every area of life. I mean, I'm up here and y'all know I've struggled with asthma, but I'm still going to preach as long as I can. I mean, you might have to hear me cough, or I sometimes spit pretty close to the front row, so you might want a shield or something. No, I'm kidding. But but you know what? I'm on Sunday. One of the elders asked me, "Are you feeling up to coming in?" I said, "I'm going to preach." Because here's the thing. I plan on preaching till I die. There's no retirement plan for this guy. And so you know what? I want to make sure I can. And so I'm going to do it as much as I can, right? And that's the thing. Even if it's hard, we have to press forward. If it's hard to walk, you need to be walking. If it's hard to lift, you better be lifting. Because the longer you don't, that ease, that apathy will deteriorate you. And when it comes to our spiritual life, woe to those who are at ease in Zion. Amos chapter 6. And to those who feel secure in the mountain of Samaria. Woe to those who lie on the beds of ivory and stretch themselves out on couches and eat lambs from the flock and the calves from the midst of the stalls. I mean, it sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? I mean, a pretty easy life. And let me be very clear. Don't ever wealth shame any believer. There's nothing wrong with having resources. Mostly I know this because it seems like every great character of faith was pretty well blessed at the end of the day, right? Sometimes they went through periods of poverty. You know, Joseph, I mean, he's a slave, and then he's the second most powerful man in the world. I mean, you see Abraham, sometimes he's got nothing and he's wandering, but then he goes and Abimelech gives him twice as much as he has when he leaves. I mean, David, Daniel becomes the second most powerful man in the world. I mean, on and on and on. God doesn't have any issue with his people having things. You know why he doesn't? Because he's a father. And I have children, so I understand this. My son, I wanted him to have, he wanted my old Mustang. I had an old 2005 Mustang, and he wanted that car. And so, I gave him that car. I wanted him to have it. And I couldn't have really afforded anything better, but let's imagine that I could have. Let's imagine that preaching was a little bit more financially lucrative than it is. And I could have afforded him a Lamborghini. Okay? Every boy wants a Lamborghini. He wants that. If I could have afforded one, he would not have had one. He wouldn't have. But it's not because I don't want him to have everything. I do. It's because that boy was too dumb at 16 to know how to drive a car like that. And too irresponsible, right? Now, this Mustang I gave him had a 6-cylinder, and I'd driven it away. It was slow. I mean, it just looked good. So I was fine with that because I wanted him to have a cool car that wouldn't kill him. And I wanted him to spend time with his friends when they weren't drinking. And I wanted him to have a girlfriend, but them never to be alone in the house. You understand where I'm going on this? I wanted him to be popular, as long as it didn't damage his faith. Because I have a son, and I love my son more than myself, and I wanted him to have everything that was good for him. And our God has everything. You understand that? And if you ever look at your life and say, I'm struggling, I don't understand. Maybe we need to, and I say this with all gentleness and kindness, but sometimes we need to evaluate ourselves and say, maybe God doesn't give me more because maybe I couldn't handle more. Maybe I've got too much of a pride issue. Maybe I'm not a generous person, and I wouldn't do good with it. Maybe I wouldn't. You see, what I'm trying to get here is God didn't have any issue with that. Money is not the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. And if you love it too much, He loves you, so He won't give it to you. It's just true. And if it is given to you and it's a problem for you, it might not have come from Him. This is spiritual warfare. The devil gives gifts too, for different reasons. You see, when it comes to this idea, we have so much. And it's dangerous if we allow it to make us apathetic. You see, apathy is the ultimate insult to God. Have you ever, I'm ashamed to say this. I can't believe I'm going to use this as an illustration. I'm glad none of my family's here. Several Christmases ago, my daughter was in college, and she got us all Christmas gifts, and she got me this Christmas gift. And I'm always excited about her gifts, but I was not in a, let me be clear, since we're talking about apathy, I was not really in an exercising mode in my life. I was more evaluating for when I would exercise someday, But my daughter, they always worry about their dad. Dad, you need to lose some weight. Dad, you need to get in shape and all this. So she gets me a Christmas present, and we're opening up Christmas presents, and I open it up, and it's a Fitbit watch. Okay, that's a problem. That even in the name, it says Fit in the name. It's a Fitbit watch, and I don't even know what it is. I'm like, oh, is this like one of those new Apple Watch things? No, Dad, it's better. It helps you exercise. And it must have been written all over my face. Because I said, oh, thanks, And I'm telling you, I would go back and take that back, and I would be Mr. Excited about that. Because that hurt my daughter's feelings. And to this day, sometimes at Christmas, that was like 8 years ago. And sometimes when she hands me her gift at Christmas, it's like, well, I hope you like it, Dad. And it's like, I've said, I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry, But it was an insult because she gave me this great gift, And she spent money on that. She didn't have a lot of money. She was a college student. And she did that because she loved her daddy, right? She wanted her daddy to be healthy, and I insulted her. see, with everything we've been given, when we're apathetic and we just want to, we have this beautiful couch. You know, he talked about the couches in Zion, Samaria. We have these beautiful things, and all we want to do is give the Lord the minimum time we can. And what do you mean? They're having that guy come and preach again. He preaches an hour and a half, that Williams guy does. Why do you care? I mean, why does that bother you? I mean, Williams is a great preacher. No, I'm kidding. But I mean, why does it bother you? You're just worried you don't have enough time to do something else? Or, you know, the elders, why do we have to have these 4-day gospel meetings? Don't they know that we have, and I mean, you make your own applications, but do you understand what I'm getting at here? It's almost like we take it and we say, oh, thanks, Lord. Revelation chapter 3, 16 and 17. But because you are lukewarm, I will spew you forth from my mouth. I would rather you be hot or cold. That's an interesting text that we don't really parse out much, but he says, I would rather you be hot or cold. Rather. He says, I would rather you be against me than halfway be for me. That's what he says. Because the apathy. And the devil wants us just to do the minimum, doesn't he? The devil wants us to be halfway. I can tell you, I've learned more about this in the last few years. I'm at a congregation now where we're growing, and we're not really, few people have asked us, because we have kind of a weird dynamic. We have a young adults class between 60 and 70, between the ages of 25 and 35. And that is the demographic that the churches of Christ are losing the most. I mean, if you don't know that. But we have an average age. We have more of those than we do people above 60. I mean, it's weird. And we really don't know why. It's a new thing. It's been the last 3 years, and they're just coming in droves. But then we brought in a guy who was talking in our gospel meeting about evangelism, and the elders pulled him in and said, well, your church is being very evangelistic. What do we need to do to evangelize? And we're all sitting there ready to take notes, you know. And he says, oh, y'all don't need to do anything. You're doing exactly what you're need to be doing. And we said, what do you mean? We're not doing anything. We're not doing Fishers of Men. We're not doing, the open Bible study. We're not doing this program. We don't have a joy bus in line. We're not doing anything. He said, you're doing the one thing that Jesus said to do to grow. Jesus told us how to grow. And I'm thinking, yeah, evangelize. He said, no, it's very simple. He says, by this all men will know that you're my disciples by the love you have for one another. He said, and since I've been here, you've had events at the church building every single night of the week. And people are eating together, and people are spending time together. If we want to be the church of the first century, then we need to spend more time together, not less. And we need to complain less about the drive. You know what? If the church is too far for you to come very often, move. I mean, people used to do that, right? Choose where they wanted to live based upon where the church was. And I'm being kind of funny, but I'm kind of not being. What I'm getting at here is that, what is our main priority? Where would we rather be than with the people of God? And if we wouldn't rather, and that's what we're seeing at West Main, these young people, they have a potluck every Sunday of just young people. And young people don't know how to cook. And they still have a potluck every week. And they have game nights on Friday. They play pickleball one, and that's an old person game, and they play it. I mean, you know why? They just can't get enough of each other. And you know what? Every visitor stays. Because they want to be a part of something you can't get enough of. But you see, that's the opposite is apathy. Well, I have to give some more. I have to do some more. I have to go some more. Apathy. Maybe that's the devil saying, the church is sure asking a lot of you. Or you're tired. Don't they know how hard you work? Don't they know how far you live? Don't they know how high gas is? That's why there are mopeds, folks. Oh, you live in Seattle. That'd be really a wet experience, wouldn't it? I mean, but the devil. Do we even factor him in? Finally, dissension. We're running out of time already again, but an army that fights against itself will be defeated. Do I have to explain that? Sometimes there's friendly fire. That happens accidentally. But literally, if you have Team Bravo and Team Beta or whatever, and they start shooting at each other, the enemy can sit back and enjoy the show. That is, it's called civil war. And, I teach restoration history. That's what I studied in my doctoral work. And so I teach that at both the doctorate and master's level at Sunset. And there are some unique things about the restoration plea that are difficult. And I always talk about this with my students, and we try to parse this out. But we have two big-time pillars of restorationism. One is we are the movement that's trying to be primitivist. Anybody know what that is? Primitive. That means we want to go back and be like the original church. And I believe in doing that. I think that's the only reasonable approach to determining what God wants us to be, is to go back and follow the pattern. You've heard all the language, right? We're a people of the book. We speak where the Bible speaks. We follow the pattern principle, the pattern of sound words, all of that. That is a pillar of the restoration movement. But if you don't know this, the restoration movement is also a unity movement. It was formed in the United States by Campbell and Stone and Abner Smith and all these guys because they wanted to correct what was wrong in the religious world and have a basis upon which Christians could unite. Just the Word of God. So let me ask you, how have we done with that? Only one kind of Church of Christ? Well, not according to Churches of Christ in the United States. There's 13 different designations. It might say OC. That's one cup. I've never preached in a one-cup church, but I'll tell you, if I do, I'm sitting on the front pew. If you're one cup, I'm welcome to come, but I get the front pew. We got one cup, we got non-institutional, we got this kind, we got that kind, we got this, that, the other. And then we have places like Florence, Alabama, where I preach, 40,000 people, 39 Churches of Christ in the city limits. And you know why? There weren't originally 39. There were like maybe 6 100 years ago. And there were 6 because in that time you couldn't just drive across town. People had to walk or they had to ride their carriage or whatever. But then over time, you know why there's 39? And this is true everywhere. I'm not picking on Florence. It's a great place. Raised my kids there. But it's true everywhere because this congregation had a division and they became these 2 congregations. And then this one had we're like amoebas. We just... In the Garden of Gethsemane, as Jesus is about to go to the cross. John's account's very different than the Synoptic Gospels. The Synoptics, it focuses on what he said as far as, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful even unto death. Lord, if there be any other way, let this cup pass from me 3 times. Disappointed that his disciples couldn't even stay awake. But John focuses on the words of the prayer. And this is what he prayed for. Now get this, Jesus is about to go to the cross. And of all the things he could have prayed for, don't you think it was probably something of prime importance? And he didn't pray for many important things. He didn't pray that we would be evangelistic. But we need to be evangelistic, but that's not what he prayed for. He didn't pray that we would be doctrinally sound. We need to be doctrinally sound, but that's not what he prayed for. What did he pray for? Lord, my prayer is not for these alone, the disciples, but for those who would believe on me through their word. Who is that? That's you and me. That they may be one. Even as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they might be in us, that the world may believe, that thou hast sent me. If the world sees that we can't get along, we will never fulfill our purpose, and the devil will always win. Always. And I didn't say that, Jesus did. And then we go through and we see places like Ecclesiastes chapter 4, 9 through 10. You know that passage. 2 are better than 1. For when one falls, the other can lift him up. What's he saying? He's saying we need each other. Even places like Hebrews chapter 10. Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together. You know what's sometimes missed in the way we preach that? When it's just a letter of the law, you better come to church or else kind of thing. We miss the reason for it. You know, we come to church. It says in Ephesians, when we sing, we're singing to God? Well, of course we are, but what does Ephesians say? Who does Ephesians say we're singing to? Singing to one another. And oh, by the way, that text is really interesting because nobody ever talks about the previous verse, which says, do not be drunk with wine, which is dissipation, but be filled. But the word filled is the same kind of word as drunk. But be filled with the Spirit. So literally he's saying, don't be drunk with the Spirit, but be drunk with the Holy Spirit. That doesn't mean being charismatic and jumping the pews. It means being filled with the excitement about God and the church and one another. And singing to one another. Because drunk people do that, right? They sing. Singing to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Go back and re-listen to this and make note that I said drunk with the Spirit and not with the other. He said don't be with the other. But all of that is saying we need each other. So when he says in Hebrews 10, he says, don't forsake the assembly. Why? Stirring up one another for love and good work. We need each other. We are soldiers in a war. And if everybody just says, okay, let's fight. Everybody go do your own thing. Can you imagine how that would work? Especially when we're surrounded like 1,000 to 1 by the enemy. No, I need to watch your back, and you need to watch my back. And we need to encourage each other and help each other. We need to be unified. And I'll tell you, in all honesty, in the church, we're the unity movement that hasn't been very good at unity. Now, don't misunderstand. There are times we can't have unity because there are things. We're not going to agree with doctrinal, untruths. We're not going to do that. We're not going to compromise. That's not what I'm getting at. But you know what I've found in the church? Most church divisions are not about doctrinal untruths. They're not about divisions most of them because somebody said something that hurt my feelings. How dare they say that to me? Most of them are, who do those elders think they are? They didn't even ask my opinion. Most of them are, I helped a lot at VBS and nobody said thank you. You realize I'm not making these up. That's right. And here's the thing. I hurt my daughter's feelings and I regret it. But we still have Christmas together. Because she forgave me. Because I'm her daddy. And we're family. We got to stop acting like the church is a political club or a social club or some kind of organization or that the money we give is an investment. Now, if you want to say in how the church spends the money you give, don't give it anymore. It's not a gift. That's called an investment. That's why you have an Edward Jones agent, right? I mean, we need to get right in our head what the church is. Church is a family. And families hurt each other. Families disappoint one another. Families put up with the crazy uncle because he's your uncle. Families discipline one another. But families don't give up on one another. And if they do, they're not doing family right. The devil wants to divide us. And when he does, all the fighting stops to the enemy. And all we do is fight with one another. This fellow who came to West Main and told us, he said, I only have one piece of advice for you. He said, make the biggest item in your budget, spending more money on doing anything possible to get brethren to do stuff together. And I was like, did he just say to do that? He said, that's what we're doing at my congregation, and we're growing like crazy. We got Bible studies everywhere. He said, because everybody who comes in wants to come back. Because you can't find that family anywhere else in the world. Dissension. All right, we got like 7 minutes. Forces of good to help the righteous. I'm going to go through this real quick, but the forces of heaven were not only numerous enough to battle Satan in Revelation 12, and his forces, they were powerful enough to win. And they're on our side. And that should be an encouragement to us. They fight beside us. 2 Kings chapter 6, 14 through 17. That's where Elisha was up on the wall. We mentioned this the other day. The servant came up. He was afraid. And he said, what are we going to do, Elisha? And Elisha said, don't worry. Those who are with us are greater than those who are with them. They opened his eyes. He saw all of the armies of God before him in fiery chariots. And here's the thing, is they fight beside us. It was a fight in the physical realm, a spiritual conflict between good and evil. And there were spiritual beings in the spiritual world engaged in that same conflict. There are many conflicts. Jude 9. This one, I don't know what this one means. I'm telling you. That, don't you remember when Michael the archangel contended with the devil over the body of Moses and wouldn't bring rebuke, but said, the Lord rebuke you? If you know what that means, you're welcome to teach this class next time, because I don't. I mean, there is some references in Jewish writings that might kind of dovetail into this. But as far as from the biblical record, but I know what it does say. There are conflicts that are going on all the time in the spiritual world about things we can't even imagine. Right? Many conflicts. But then Hebrews 1, 13 through 14. You remember what that says? If you turn over there, Hebrews 1, 13 and 14 tells us the purpose of angels. But to which of the angels he has ever said, sit at my right hand to make your enemies your footstool? Are they not ministering spirits sent forth to minister to those who will inherit salvation? Who is those who inherit salvation? That is you and me. And the scriptures by inspiration say that angels serve, they minister, they attend to us. Now, how does that look? I don't know. I have my imaginations. I wrote a whole book on it. But what I envision is that every time we face off against the devil, that means every time I'm tempted to do wrong, every time I sit down in a Starbucks with a venti, grande, whatever it is, across the table from some lost person, and we open our Bibles, we wage war. And we don't do it alone. And I don't know if that means guardian angels. I think maybe it does. That's kind of how I envisioned it in the novel. But whatever way it is, they are fighting alongside us, and there are forces of wickedness opposing us. And so as we close out, I wanted to kind of pique your imagination to read a little excerpt from the novel, just about 2 minutes worth. But then I thought, and we're going to try this. If it doesn't work, Donnie's going to give me the thumbs up or thumbs down. If it doesn't work, then I'll just read. But it's on Audible, and that guy's a professional reader, so he's a lot better than me. So I'm going to give you this little excerpt, and I want to put this microphone right up to my phone, and we're going to see how that works.
Or Harold would become stronger and better able to resist. The fight would last less time than Josiah hoped. Groanmaker was not tiring at all. As Josiah relaxed his guard for just a moment, the captain of hell pressed his attack with a fury like Josiah had never seen. The ebony blade shot back and forth with lightning speed while Josiah struggled to parry. Then, as the angel worked to recover his balance and deflect the third of 3 quick lunges, the ebony blade slipped past his defenses and bit into his shoulder. Agony rolled in waves through Josiah as he dropped his sword. The brilliant flame winked out as it left the angel's hand, and only the handle rattled as it hit the floor. Josiah followed a moment later and lay helpless on his side, convulsing slightly with tremors of pain. He was paralyzed, but aware of his surroundings, and gritted his teeth in rage and shame as Groanmaker knelt to look him in the face. "You fought well." The demon wore an amused smile as he spoke. "Perhaps we will face one another again." He stood and turned toward the 2 humans, weeping together on the bed. Then he leaned over next to Harold and whispered in his ear. "Listen, Harold!" Josiah cried as he flailed on the floor, spasms jerking his body. It was up to Harold now. The pain would subside soon, and Josiah would return to normal. But not soon enough. For the time being, Harold must resist the enemy's voice alone.
I don't know if that's what it's like. But I envision that even if the details of my imagination don't match up, the Spirit does. And what I mean by the Spirit, not the Holy Spirit, I mean the concept of it, the desire of God's forces. They fight beside us. They're on our side. They struggle day in and day out. And not for the things that people imagine that they do, governments and politics. And no. They struggle for what's really important. That lady in line in front of me at Walmart. That guy who cut you off in traffic. That precious soul sitting across from you at Starbucks. For God is not slack in His promises, as some would count slackness. But He is long-suffering toward us, not willing that anyone should perish, but that all should come to repentance. That's what the war's about. And we don't fight it alone. Thank you all.